By 60, more than 1 in 3 women in this country will find themselves starting over. Not by design, not by plan, because something ended, a marriage, a career, a life they had built around someone else, and suddenly they are standing in the middle of what is left, looking at a beginning they did not ask for. Most of them are terrified, and most of them, 2 or 3 years later, will tell you it was the most important thing that ever happened to them. I want to tell you about a woman named Diane. Diane is 61 years old. She was married for 32 years to a man she had loved genuinely, had built a life with carefully, and had organized the second half of her adulthood around. They raised 2 children. They built a home. They had a plan, the plan most couples have, the quiet, unspoken plan that says, we will do this together, and when the time comes, we will slow down together, and we will be enough for each other. 2 years ago, her husband asked her for a divorce. He had met someone, he was 58. He told her to start fresh. And so Diane, at 59, standing in the kitchen of a house she had spent 15 years making into a home, found herself at the beginning of something she had not chosen and did not know how to name. My name is Patricia Hayes. Welcome to Patricia's Porch. What I want to talk about today is what it actually means to start over at 60. Not the version of it that gets discussed in motivational content, where starting over is presented as an adventure and 60 is just a number and everything is possible if you believe in yourself. I have no patience for that version because it does not resemble the experience I have witnessed in the women I know who have actually lived through it. I want to talk about the real version, the version that begins with fear and disorientation and a financial spreadsheet that does not look the way you hoped it would. The version that asks hard questions about who you are when the roles you have spent decades building have ended. And the version that if you stay with it, if you do not run from it or paper over it, with a performance of resilience can lead somewhere more genuinely your own than anything you have built before. Because that is what happens. Not always and not easily, but often enough that I believe it deserves to be talked about honestly. The first thing I want you to understand about starting over at 60 is what you are actually starting with. This is the thing that the fear obscures. When a woman at 60 looks at the landscape of her life and sees everything that is gone, the partnership, the shared income, the identity that came with a particular role, she tends to see what is missing. She does not, in those first weeks and months, tend to see what is present. What is present is 40 years of lived experience. 40 years of knowing how to manage difficulty, how to navigate relationships, how to organize a life and solve a problem and survive a hard season. The woman who is starting over at 60 is not starting from the same place as the woman who started at 22. She is starting from a position of enormous accumulated competence she has rarely stopped to name because she has been too busy using it. Diane told me something in our first conversation that has stayed with me. She said, I keep using the phrase starting over, but I don't think it's accurate. You only start over if you're starting from nothing. I am not starting from nothing. I am starting from everything I know. She was right. And I think the moment a woman can genuinely believe that, not as a consolation, but as a fact, is the moment the terror begins to change into something else. The second thing I want you to understand is the money question, because it does not help anyone to pretend it is not there. For many women who find themselves starting over at 60, the financial picture is frightening, particularly for women who spent years out of the workforce, raising children, supporting a partner's career, managing the household and the family in the ways that were expected but never paid. Those years left a gap in pension contributions, in savings, in earning potential that did not grow the way it might have if their attention had gone somewhere else. Diane's financial situation, when her marriage ended, was not straightforward. She had worked part-time for most of her children's school years. She had contributed to the household in a dozen ways that did not appear on a balance sheet. The divorce settlement gave her the house and a share of the pension. It did not give her the income she needed to sustain what she had. She sat with a financial advisor, not a cheerful one who told her everything would be fine, but an honest one who sat with her and went through the numbers and told her the truth. The truth was manageable. It required change. It required decisions she had been avoiding, but it was manageable. She told me, "I spent the first month imagining the worst. Every number I looked at felt like proof that I had ruined everything. And then I sat with someone who actually knew what they were talking about, and I realized I had been fighting a phantom. The real situation was hard. But it was not the catastrophe I had been carrying around in my head." What Diane did next was methodical, and I think it is worth describing, because I have seen so many women freeze at exactly this point, staring at the numbers, overwhelmed, and doing nothing, because doing nothing feels safer than doing the wrong thing. She made a list, not of everything she was afraid of, but of every concrete decision that needed to be made in the next 12 months. The house, the pension, the income gap. She put each one on a separate piece of paper, and she dealt with them one at a time, in order of urgency, with professional advice where she needed it, and her own hard thinking where she did not. She told me that breaking it into pieces was the only way she could manage it. She said the whole thing together was unsurvivable. In pieces, it was just a series of problems, and I have been solving problems my whole life. I say this not to minimize the real financial difficulty that many women face when they start over. I say it because the fear that runs ahead of the facts is often more damaging than the facts themselves. And because the first act of building a new financial life is always the same, look at the actual numbers with someone who can help you understand them, and start from what is real. The third thing I want you to understand is the identity question, and I think this is the one that is most underestimated, most underdiscussed, and most likely to determine whether a woman rebuilds something genuinely hers or simply rebuilds a slightly different version of what she had before. When a long marriage ends, or a long career ends, or children leave a home that was organized around their presence, a woman loses more than the practical structures of her life. She loses the role that told her who she was: the wife, the mother, the woman in the house on the corner who had her life in order, the person the family organizes around, the person he came home to. When those roles end, the question that surfaces is one that most women have never had to sit with before in its full, unmediated form. The question is simply, who am I when I am not being that? Diane described this to me with a clarity that I found moving. She said, "For the first 6 months, I did not know what I thought about anything. Not really. I had been in a relationship for so long that my opinions had become a kind of negotiated middle ground. What I liked, what I wanted, what I thought was worth doing on a Saturday afternoon. All of it had been developed in the context of him. When he was gone, I did not know what I thought. I had to learn it from scratch. This is not a small thing. This is the work. And it takes time, and it is uncomfortable, and it will not be solved by a weekend retreat or a new haircut or any of the other things that well-meaning people will suggest. It requires sitting quietly with yourself long enough for the real answers to surface. not the answers that reflect what you were taught to want. The answers that come from the part of you that has been waiting patiently for the space to be heard. Diane started keeping a journal, not for anyone to read, not to produce anything, just to write down each morning what she actually thought, what she actually felt, what she actually wanted to do that day if no one was watching and no one needed anything from her. In the early weeks, the pages were mostly confusion. She would write something and then cross it out because she could not tell whether she actually believed it or whether she was just writing what she thought she should believe. She would write that she was fine and then sit and look at the word and know it was not quite honest. She would write that she was angry, and that felt closer, but still not quite it. Slowly, the fog thinned. She began to notice what she looked forward to when she woke up in the morning, not what she thought she was supposed to look forward to, but what actually moved in her when she thought about the day ahead. She began to recognize the difference between the things she did because they were expected of her and the things she did because they were genuinely hers. That distinction, which sounds simple, is one that most of us have almost entirely lost by 60 because we have spent so long organizing ourselves around other people's needs that our own have become nearly invisible. She said it took 3 months before she trusted the answers. 3 months before she could distinguish between what she genuinely felt and what she felt she was supposed to feel. But by month 4, she said, she was starting to meet herself. The fourth thing I want you to understand is what women who start over at 60 tend to discover on the other side of the fear. This is the part that is hardest to convey to someone who is still in the middle of the difficult part, because it sounds like the motivational content I already told you I have no patience for. But I am going to say it anyway, because it is what I have seen, and I think it matters. What they tend to discover is that they are more capable than they believed, more resilient, more creative in building a life, and this is the one that surprises them most, more themselves than they have been in years. Diane went back to full-time work at 60. She had worked in marketing, part-time and then less than part-time, for most of her marriage. She was not confident about returning. She felt behind and out of date and aware, painfully, that the industry she had been in was full of people half her age who had been doing this without interruption for the last 2 decades. She got a role, not the role she would have had if she had not stopped, a smaller one. She did not perform that as triumph. She told me it felt humbling and sometimes humiliating, and she went home in the first weeks and wondered whether she had made the right call. And then something happened that she had not anticipated. She was good at it. Not good despite her years away, but partly because of them. She had judgment that the younger people around her did not have. She had patience. She had the capacity to manage complexity without panicking, because she had spent 30 years managing complexity that no one paid her for. She knew how to read a room and how to handle a difficult conversation and how to stay calm in a situation that was trying to be a crisis. She told me, I thought I was behind. I didn't realize that everything I had done in those years had been training. It just hadn't been training that anyone had put a job title on. The fifth thing I want you to understand, and this is the one I most want to leave you with, is what it means to begin at 60. In our culture, beginning is associated with youth. We celebrate the young person who is starting out, who has their whole life ahead of them, who can afford to take risks because time is on their side. We are less comfortable with the idea of the 60-year-old who is beginning, because beginning at 60 sits awkwardly against the story we have been told about what 60 is supposed to look like. 60 is supposed to be consolidation. the quiet satisfaction of a life well built, the dividend paid out on decades of work. But many women at 60 are not consolidating. They are not receiving dividends. They are standing at a crossroads they did not choose, looking at a road they have not walked, deciding whether they have the courage to take the first step. And what I want to say to those women is this: the road is real, the beginning is real, and you are more prepared for it than you know. Diane is 2 years in now. Her house is smaller. Her income is steady, though not large. She has a circle of friendships that she has invested in with the energy she used to put into a marriage. She has opinions, again, clear ones, that are entirely her own. She told me last year, built a life that fits her. She said, if I had been given the choice at 59, I would not have chosen this. I was too afraid of it. But I was not given the choice. And the thing I understand now that I did not understand then is that you do not need to want the beginning in order to deserve it. You just have to take it. If you are listening to this and you are somewhere in the middle of your own starting over, if the end has just happened, or if it happened a year ago and you are still standing in what is left of it, not yet sure what you are building, I want you to know that what you are feeling is the correct response to a genuinely hard thing. You do not have to be fine. You do not have to have a plan. You do not have to know yet who you are when the old roles end. What you have to do is stay. Stay with the question. Stay in the life you are building, even when it is not yet clear what you are building it into. The clarity comes not because you force it, and not because everything eventually sorts itself out on its own. It comes because you stay present with yourself long enough to hear what you actually want. Diane said something in our last conversation that I have written down and kept. She said, I thought starting over meant going back. Back to the beginning, back to less, back to something smaller than what I had. But starting over is not going back. Starting over is the first time you get to go forward as entirely yourself. She is 61 years old. She is not done. She is, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely beginning. And so, wherever you are in your own story, are you... My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch. I make a new episode here every week because I believe the conversations women are not having out loud are the ones that need to be had most urgently. If something today found you, please share it with someone who is in the middle of their own starting over. And there is a subscribe button below because I would genuinely love to keep being part of your week. Thank you for being here. I will see you next time.